Hello everybody and welcome to yet another episode of Reviews in Review, the show where we round up all of the games that IGN recently reviewed because you're a busy person with lots of important things to do. Or maybe you don't have anything going on, but you like all of your info in one video to help you decide if you want to spend your hard-earned money on a video game about murdering people, or one about building a factory, or maybe flying a spaceship. How about being a ninja, or running away from a horrible monster, or maybe just watching a bunch of squirrels. Why don't we start out with the squirrels? That sounds nice. Simon Carty reviewed Nuts, an indie puzzle adventure where you play as a scientist whose very weird job it is to spy on a bunch of squirrels, trying to figure out what those little guys are up to. Simon thought it was good, scoring it a 7 out of 10 and praising its laid-back atmosphere, intriguing story, and distinctive art direction. However, Simon thought the trial and error, rinse and repeat squirrel surveillance mechanics began to wear a bit thin, writing, "Although I enjoyed the flow of methodical and relatively unchallenging puzzles, by its final chapter I was left wanting more variation." But overall, it sounds like he had a good time, calling it a relaxing puzzle adventure with an intriguing mystery inside its shell. Simon also mentioned that Nuts was at times reminiscent of Firewatch and Return of the Obra Dinn, so if you're into those kinds of stylized first-person indie adventures, this might be your kind of game. Mitchell Saltzman checked out Olija, which he also thought was good and worth a 7 out of 10. Mitchell thought the core mechanic of throwing a magic harpoon that lets you teleport to wherever it lands gave a quick and snappy feel to fighting and movement, as well as allowing for some fun Metroidvania-esque exploration. He thought the combat was impactful and the story was well told, but his biggest gripe was that it ended too soon and didn't offer much challenge or a reason for a replay like additional difficulties. And though Olija's combat has depth and flexibility, its enemies and bosses don't push back hard enough that you'll necessarily need it. That said, if you're after a bite-sized 2D action adventure, Olija could make for a fun afternoon. IGN review czar Dan Stapleton took the early access version of Everspace II for a spin and also scored it a 7 out of 10 to grow on. Everspace II's biggest change over its predecessor is to jettison its roguelike roots and reroute all power to its action RPG mechanics. There's no shortage of combat, but keep in mind Everspace II doesn't control like your conventional full-throttle space fighter game. That's not bad though. Dan pointed out that the fine level of movement control lets Everspace II do a lot more with puzzles than you see in most space shooters, which sounds like it adds some fun variety while exploring Everspace's, space. Overall, Dan felt that Everspace II is off to a great start and that the early access version offers a dozen or so hours of gleeful spaceship adventures until the final version blasts off sometime in 2022. Here's one we missed last August when it came out of its years-long early access run, Factorio. Liana Hafer scored Factorio an 8 out of 10 and had some high praise for the strategy game about building a factory on a procedurally generated alien planet, calling it dauntingly complex and writing that the sheer amount of stuff there is to do in Factorio is breathtaking and a bit frightening. But its clear and readable art style, a wealth of hotkeys, shortcuts, planet options, as well as mod support can help cut down on the stress. Liana sunk 40 hours into Factorio and could easily see herself spending hundreds more thanks to its depth, which is more than enough to get her through some stretches of tedious progression. Overall, Liana felt that when Factorio clicked, it scratched a similar itch to playing bottomless games like Minecraft, Dwarf Fortress, and Crusader Kings. Oh hey, Mitchell Saltzman reviewed another pixelated retro-inspired game this month, Cyber Shadow. Mitchell gave the unabashed Ninja Gaiden homage an 8 out of 10, which he called a wonderful merging of old-school aesthetic and modern design sensibilities, much like Shovel Knight was back in 2014. That's an apt comparison, since Cyber Shadow was published by Shovel Knight devs Yacht Club Games. Mitchell praised the level, enemy, and progression design as well as the soundtrack, but was less enthusiastic about the forgettable story and lack of New Game Plus, and felt the checkpoint placement was occasionally a bit too sparse for him to slap the tough but fair label on it without a couple of caveats. But he had way more nice things to say about Cyber Shadow than complaints. Now, before you come in here and say that if Mitchell's complaining about checkpoints, he should get good, I assure you, Mitchell Saltzman is good at video games. I keep saying on podcasts that he's the guy who can beat those Dark Souls tutorial bosses that you're supposed to die on, but apparently that's not him, and he doesn't do that. That's Brendan Graber, who works on our guides team, who's also good at video games. But the point of my story is, Mitchell likes Cyber Shadow, and he's also good at video games, and also when people go in the comments and they're like, IGN sucks at video games, that's not true. Some people suck at video games who work at IGN. Such as me. Wow. Where was I? Oh yeah, Travis Northup reviewed Skul the Hero Slayer, which also got an 8. Travis thought this roguelite action platformer was an original take on the genre that used a novel head-swapping mechanic to put plenty of unique playable characters front and center and let you switch between them instantly to pull off some sweet synergies, something he likened to a morbid body-snatching Kirby. I mean, that's literally just Kirby. He eats people and then he becomes them. It's extremely morbid. Travis's main gripes were less than stellar story and lack of boss variety, but all in all, he thought Skul's retro world of skeletons and knights is absolutely dripping with charm while still offering a substantial challenge. Yet another game that received an 8 out of 10 this month is The Medium, the very first Xbox Series X/S exclusive. And yes, it's on PC, but the point is, your old Xbox One won't cut it. Our reviewer Tristan Ogilvy praised this long-awaited psychological horror game as all thriller with no filler, and felt its reality-shifting mechanic added a literal whole new dimension to some otherwise familiar puzzle mechanics. Tristan thought the story was superbly paced and palpably tense, and that its charming protagonist Marianne managed to keep the mood from becoming overwhelmingly bleak thanks to some excellent writing and voice work. Meanwhile, he accredited a good chunk of the medium's tension to its unkillable otherworld villain, the Maw, who pursues Marianne through both worlds. However, Tristan did note that the medium's third-person perspective and fixed camera angles meant that it wasn't able to mess with his head quite as much as some of Bloober Team's previous games that were in first person, but that it's still a nerve-wracking and absorbing horror adventure. Luke Riley reviewed Hitman 3, giving it a 9 out of 10 because he thought it was amazing, and if you haven't seen enough people fawning over it online, Hitman is a hit, man. This probably isn't news if you played the last 2 games, but the good news is that Hitman 3 is more of the same, turning you loose in 6 huge new intricately designed assassination sandboxes, which Luke thought were some of the best in the entire series, offering a refined, reliable, and robust curtain closer to the current World of Assassination trilogy. Coupled with the fact that progress carries over from Hitman 1 and 2, and those games' levels are all playable within Hitman 3, and that all 3 games are now fully playable in PlayStation VR, this is one hell of a way to button up a trilogy. Luke wasn't blown away by the VR mode, which unfortunately seems marooned halfway between full motion controls and traditional controls, but it's still a fun novelty and definitely an added bonus. I thoroughly agree with Luke's praise of Hitman 3 and wish I was playing it right now instead of making this video where I'm trying to dress like Agent 47, but I clearly have too much hair. For whatever reason, I never gave the first 2 games a fair shake. I think it's because the first one was episodically released, but I took 3 for a spin and I completely fell in love. So if you're like me, I would highly recommend checking Hitman 3 out. Immediately after beating it, I jumped right into the first game, which is more of the same in the best ways possible. And even though Hitman 1 came out almost 5 years ago, you would never guess, thanks to the coat of high-res paint that they slapped on it alongside the next-gen versions of 3. Also, you might not guess it by the marketing and general presentation, but these games are extremely funny. Sure, you can totally play them as serious stealth games about being a badass and serious, cold-hearted assassin who kills people, but patiently eavesdropping on some NPCs will frequently reward you with some cleverly written dialogue, and putting a banana on the stairs will make people slip on a banana peel and fall down the stairs, which is equally funny in a different way.
Sir, did you do this?
Alright, there you have it. That was a quick rundown of all of the big reviews that IGN put up for games over the last month. Obviously, if you want to know more, go check out the full reviews wherever you consume your IGN, and a big, huge thank you to everyone who left really nice comments on last month's episode of this show. It was good justification for getting to do a second episode, which was this episode. So keep those nice comments coming, and if you'd like to find out more about the games that are coming out in the next month, I do another monthly show that's called The Biggest Game Releases or something, and I think next month is called February, so go look the February biggest games month and type that, and then, you know, as always, remember, video games on something IGN.